Hi, I'm Vinay,
I'm Sean.
and this is Versus Football.
So last time we took a look at the teams in the AFC East, namely the Buffalo Bills, Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots, and the New York Jets. So now we're going to be taking a look at teams in the AFC North based on their needs from the most needs to, we believe, the least amount of needs uh, on their final roster. So we're going to begin the AFC North and begin to take a look at what each team in the AFC North needs by first taking a look at the Cincinnati Bengals, whom we believe have the most significant number of needs. And number one on that list of needs, we would say, is the offensive line. Now, the offensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals has been notoriously bad as of late, especially last season. And I think it's capped off by the fact that Joe Burrow got hurt mid-season because he tore his ACL as a result of persistently bad blocking. He was sacked a bunch of times per game. I think he had one of the highest sack per game rates in the entire league, like pretty much none of which he had to face in LSU or even Ohio State. So their number one priority has to be offensive line. They got rid of Bobby Hart, who was, I think, one of the most egregiously bad offensive linemen, tackle mainly on that team. Now the good thing is, one, Joe Burrow is fine, so he will start from here on out, which is a blessing considering they completely did him dirty by making him throw 60 times per game, let's say like against the Browns in prime time with absolutely no offensive line, and he still somehow made it work. But they have the fifth overall pick. That's the other good thing. With the fifth overall pick opens up a plethora of opportunities, of which I think really should be two players. There should be two players that they should be eyeing right now, both offensive tackles, because they should not even be thinking about looking anywhere else now.
So the two offensive tackles they really should be looking at are Penei Sewell out of Oregon and Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern. Me personally, I feel like they could really use someone like Penei Sewell. He's only 20 years old, won the Outland Trophy for the best offensive lineman in the country at the college football level as a 19-year-old. Physically freakish, almost like 6'5", 330 pounds, and can move, exceptional footwork. He doesn't have, he's not as technically gifted as Rashawn Slater. He could use some work, but the fact that he is as good as he is, even and he's still slightly raw, shows that he has a very, very high ceiling. And he is one of those quote unquote generational prospects at tackles. And while I previously argued that the Jets should have moved in position for Rashawn Slater because they have their more generational talent in Mekhi Becton, the Bengals don't really have that kind of generational talent on their line. They could use someone like Rashawn Slater and maybe kick Jonah Williams out to right tackle because Jonah Williams is solid and was good coming out of Alabama in 2019, but he was never considered the prospect that Sewell is. You don't really see a lot of guys. 2020 was truly a rarity in terms. 2020 and 2021 are truly a rarity in terms of the quality of offensive tackles available. There is a case to be made for Rashawn Slater. He is smaller. He is around 6'3". But what he lacks in size, he makes up for in technique. He is probably the technically greatest offensive lineman in the class, and with the best tape. The game that really solidified Slater as a top prospect for most people, including myself, is his game versus Ohio State in 2019, where he had to go up against Chase Young, and he neutralized Chase Young. And sometimes we talk about going up against certain NFL stars in college. Some college players turn out to be better in the pros than they were in college. You know, take Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes. Usually this happens at the quarterback position, but somebody like Chase Young was great at the NFL, and we all saw it coming because he was great in the college level. And so there wasn't a lot of, there wasn't a market improvement. You can't really improve upon what Chase Young can do. So the fact that Rashawn Slater did what he did against somebody like Chase Young is a very, very strong argument for why he should be taken within the top 10. I don't see him dropping past number 10, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The Bengals did add Riley Reef in the free agency, but he is not a long-term starter. He is 32, played admirably for the Lions and the Vikings, but at this point in his career, he is more of a stopgap. Could definitely be a good veteran presence for whoever they take, probably Penei Sewell. They do also have a quality center in Billy Price. He is obviously he's not the greatest center in the league, but he's solid. There is a lot of room for improvement almost everywhere on the line. They could probably use a good, solid, permanent guard. Quentin Spain is probably their best guard option that I can see.
Right.
That's also another case for Slater because of his versatility. A lot of times you hear people saying, "Oh, if they don't work at a tackle, you can put them into guard." I see this tackle actually as a guard, and it's generally an insult against them. When in reality, a lot of times, if a tackle can play guard, it's because they are truly versatile in their skill set, and that is Rashawn Slater. He can definitely kick in and play almost anywhere on the offensive line. I hesitate to put not most offensive linemen at center just because it is such a unique position on the offensive line with its own almost culture, and it definitely has its own lingo that you can't just put a tackle and say, hey, play center now. That only probably Bruce Matthews can pull that off in actuality, and very few people are Bruce Matthews.
Like probably it'll have to be a guard at the very least. Like I remember for my Seahawks, Damian Lewis filled in as as a center, even though he was taken as a guard from the 2020 draft by us in the 3rd round. He filled in pretty nicely as center, but unless it's an interior offensive lineman, it's very tough for someone to just be filled in at center like that. So they do need a little more center depth. I do think Jonah Williams, he can play around. I think he has a little bit less leverage in kind of dictating where he wants to play because he's been injured for such a long time. So he actually only allowed 3 sacks out of 634 offensive snaps in 2020. He was injured in 2019. And I think with him there, Billy Price is a pretty decent center. Another lineman of the caliber of Sewell or Slater is going to greatly bolster Joe Burrow's playmaking ability, the run game that'll be spearheaded by Joe Mixon, and I think the Bengals offense in general.
That brings us to our next point. They could definitely use a few more weapons for Joe Burrow to throw to. There is a lot of people mocking either Kyle Pitts or Jamar Chase, Burrow's old teammate, to the Bengals at number 5. And I am not a huge fan of that because their need for offensive linemen is so high that they cannot afford to pass on a player like Sewell, who will undoubtedly be there at number 5. Just because number 4 will probably either be Kyle Pitts or somebody will trade up to go get the 4th quarterback in the class, be it Trey Lance or Justin Fields, whoever San Francisco does not pick.
So I think they're going to go O-line 1st round, 5th overall. They also have the 38th overall. And by 38th, I think they might go wide receiver. They do have a pretty decent wide receiver core, to be honest with you. They have guys such as T. Higgins, who I think came on pretty nicely last season. He was, I would say, the best guy for Joe Burrow to throw to. I don't see A.J. Green coming back. He's not. I'm pretty sure he was released.
He signed with the Cardinals.
Yes, he signed with
the
Cardinals.
For one last ride.
Yeah.
Tyler Boyd is a decent number 2 option. But beyond that, there isn't a lot to work with there at the wide receiver core. And this wide receiving class is just so deep that at 38, there might be someone like Terrence Marshall available. There might be somebody like one of the Moore brothers available, either Rondale or Elijah Moore. There could be, there's going to be a lot of talent available at that spot. Somebody's going to fall. Kadarius Toney might fall.
Yeah, Kadarius Toney's a good one.
There's just so much talent. 2020 and 2021 are very good for tackles, and they're very good for wide receivers. And Cincinnati has already benefited from one in 2020 when they were able to snag T. Higgins at the top of the second round, and they could do it again in 2020. A bunch of first-round caliber receivers just happened to fall to the second round, just given the nature of that draft. The aforementioned Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr. for the Colts, Chase Claypool for the Steelers. They were all second rounders.
Even like Metcalf at the end of
Metcalf in 2019.
KJ
Somebody's
Brown.
going to fall.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to fall, and Cincinnati is going to be there. So their need for offensive linemen is going to preclude them from winning the Kyle Pitts sweepstakes or reuniting Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. But they will undoubtedly snag one of the very talented receivers at number 38 overall in the draft.
Yep. So our next position of need is going to be edge. When we initially were drafting this episode, Carl Lawson was on the Cincinnati Bengals, and he was one of the more underrated edge rushers for the Cincinnati Bengals, and he was responsible for a lot of the pressures that defense was getting on opposing quarterbacks. Now, he did sign a relatively cheap deal with the Jets, so he's not on the Bengals anymore. But that has left the Bengals with a relatively big hole to fill, which they tried to. This past offseason, they signed Trey Hendrickson, who is a very underrated, very good defensive end, very good edge rusher from the New Orleans Saints. They also got Larry Ogunjobi. He kind of doubles up as a tackle as well as an end that he used to back in the Cleveland Browns. I think in terms of other edge rushers, they are lacking. They don't have a whole lot of notable outside linebackers: Jordan Evans, Akeem Davis-Gaither, Jermaine Pratt. I think they definitely need to beef up on edge. They might find, maybe they could invest their 38th overall in an edge prospect. It's not a particularly deep edge draft or a particularly deep linebacker draft, so they might not. But it's something that they should address either in the draft or free agency.
Yeah, they do have Sam Hubbard, who was one of the better. He had the highest run stop win rate off the edge, so he is very good for like run situations. But other than that, they did wind up losing Carlos Dunlap. There was a falling out between the two parties. He is not playing well in Seattle. In the draft, I could definitely see somebody like Patrick Jones being a round 3 steal. The Cincinnati Bengals do take at the top of every round, so that gives them an advantage in finding late round talent because they have first dibs at the previous round talent that fell out. So they could probably get Patrick Jones II out of Pittsburgh, who dominated the Senior Bowl, extraordinarily athletic, could use some development, but taking him in the third round will allow Cincinnati to work with him over time and not expect him to contribute right away, although he is talented enough that he probably could. And this kind of segues into number 4, which is they need interior linemen, which they did partially address with Larry Ogunjobi. the man who terrorized them when he played with the Cleveland Browns. This is especially important as they have just parted ways with their, I would argue, future Hall of Fame defensive tackle. He was a part of the All-Decade team, Geno Atkins.
Right.
They need to beef up that interior line, especially because of who they have to play twice a year. They will have to play the Baltimore Ravens twice this year, and they will have to play the Cleveland Browns twice this year.
I think like even the Pittsburgh Steelers you could put up there. The Browns, Steelers, and Ravens all have some of the best offensive lines in the league.
Yeah, and the Browns and Ravens in particular, not just that, they have the best running backs and the best running core in the league. The Steelers, they do have a good offensive line that the Bengals need to work to get through. But in terms of actual just run games, the Bengals allowed 148 yards per game against the Cleveland Browns and allowed 282 yards per game against the Ravens, mostly off of that Week 17 game where Baltimore ran roughshod over Cincinnati. If they want to, if not be competitive in 2021, at least hinder Cleveland and Baltimore in their quest to win the division, they're going to have to find a way to stop their running games that are just so effective up the middle.
Exactly. And not only is it effective in and of itself, it's been particularly effective against the Bengals. As it pertains to the run defense, the Bengals run D, they ranked 25th in rushing attempts allowed, and they still ranked 29th in rushing yards allowed. So they gave up, they, as a result, they were 31st in rushing yards per attempt allowed. And that's not a particularly good look when you have some of the best rushing teams in the league right in your division. They have to play twice a year. Like you said, you have the double-headed Chubb and Hunt running back duo in Cleveland. You have the Baltimore run game, which is very smash mouth, right in your face. And occasionally you'll have Lamar Jackson just, take off out of absolutely nowhere. Those two teams have amongst two of the best running games in the league. I would say they're 1 and 2, honestly, if you really think about it. So the Bengals have to be ready for that, or else they'll just constantly get killed on the clock as well as on the scoreboard. As it pertains to rushing touchdowns, they don't really need to be beaten over the top with the secondary because their defensive line is relatively weak. They have tried to address that. Like we said, they got Trey Hendrickson, they got DJ Reader last season, who had a pretty good season after he left, I believe, the Texans to come to the Bengals, and Larry Ogunjobi, like we mentioned. So if they can take the leap as a total unit with these three guys to be built around, I definitely think that there is a chance and a potential for improvement, as well as getting some late round draft picks to kind of put into outside linebacker, to put into the tackle position and the interior D-line position, maybe even the inside linebacker that can occasionally run block. With that being said, we're going to be moving on to our penultimate need for them as a segue, and that is linebacker. So the linebacking core, actually, the story of the Bengals linebacking core has been the same as the rest of the defense, and it's been a microcosm of sorts. They performed pretty well, generally not badly, but they do need a lot of depth because they have a lot of teams that they're going to be playing, especially teams within their division that they play twice a year, like we said, the Browns and the Ravens and the Steelers, that are extremely strong with the run, especially in the case of the Browns and the Ravens. And they don't particularly stop the run well, nor do they stop the quarterback rushing well. So when you play Lamar Jackson twice a year, it's very, very important. It is absolutely necessary that you stop him at all costs. Otherwise, he will run away with the game. They don't even need anybody else at running back if you don't make the necessary adjustments to keep him from just blazing right past you, which he does so often. Sam Hubbard, I think that was mentioned, is a highest run stop win rate off the edge according to Next Gen Stats. But their inside run defense, like we said about the D line, is severely lacking. They got rid of Carl Lawson. They lost Carlos Dunlap to the Seahawks last season, and he's re-signed with the Seahawks this offseason, so they're not getting him back. Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson are pretty solid, have suffered a little bit of injury here and there, and they definitely need a lot more depth at the position to stop that kind of loss of depth, essentially, when their best players get hurt.
And that brings us to their final need, which is defensive back. And it's probably the part on the defense where they are the best. They do have two pretty elite safeties in Jesse Bates, or if you want to, I'm not sure if I would consider Von Bell like truly elite, but he is very, very good.
Yeah.
Obviously, Von Bell is best remembered for the hit on Juju Smith-Schuster in Week 15. He has consistently played well, dating back to his time in New Orleans, and he's carried it over in Cincinnati. And Jesse Bates is one of the best safeties in the league. He had a PFF rating of 90.1, who can stretch the length of the field in seconds, which is dangerous for a lot of these quarterbacks. And just his ability to get to the ball is unrivaled in this era, at least. So they probably don't need to pick a defensive back with it, or especially in the safety. The cornerback isn't particularly bad either. Trey Waynes was not the most exciting player for Cincinnati after being signed from Minnesota, where he was really good, but he's still a solid veteran presence. They also managed to poach Mike Hilton from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have been losing a lot of pieces on their very, very good defense, and Mike Hilton was no exception to that. They also have solid depth at the free safety position with Ricardo Allen, who was a key cog in that 2016 Falcons run. A lot of the time they're remembered for their outstanding offense, but they had some pretty good defensive pieces, and Ricardo Allen was one of them. And back to cornerback, they did sign Chidobe Awuzie, who was a part of the Cowboys from 2017 through 2020. Not the best, but not the worst cornerback in the league. Adds valuable depth at the position.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I believe that has been this episode of Versus Football, talking about the Cleveland Browns. We're talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, and we will be back with the Steelers next.